My son watched in silence while his wife told me to get out of her house. That was the night I decided I was done. I want to tell you what happened, all of it, because I think some of you will understand in a way that most people around me never did. And I want you to understand, not because I need your sympathy, but because I spent 68 years believing that love meant giving everything you had. And somewhere along the way, nobody told me that some people will take everything you give and still look you in the eye and ask for more. My name is Margaret. I live alone now in a small house in Asheville, North Carolina, and most mornings I drink my coffee on the back porch and watch the birds at the feeder I put up last spring, and I feel something I didn't expect to feel at this point in my life. I feel peaceful, not the kind of peaceful that comes from giving up. The kind that comes from finally choosing yourself. But let me go back to the beginning, because none of this makes sense without it. I taught elementary school for 31 years, 3rd grade, mostly. I loved those children, every loud, messy, wonderful one of them. And when my own son Daniel was born, I poured that same love into him. Maybe more than I had any business pouring. His father, Richard, passed when Daniel was only 19. A heart attack, fast and cruel, the way those things tend to be. It was just the two of us after that, Daniel and me, and I held on to that fact like it was something sacred. Daniel grew up to be a good-looking young man with his father's jaw and his father's stubbornness, and when he was 26, he met a woman named Cassandra at a work conference in Atlanta. She was sharp, put together, the kind of woman who always seemed to be running 10 minutes ahead of everyone else. I tried to like her. I genuinely did. In the beginning, I told myself the distance I felt was just the natural awkwardness of a mother watching her son choose someone else to be his person. I told myself that was normal, healthy even. They got married in the fall of 2018 at a vineyard outside Charlottesville. It was a beautiful wedding. I paid for a significant portion of it, not because Daniel asked, but because it was his wedding, and Richard wasn't there to help, and I wanted Daniel to have the day he deserved. I never mentioned that to anyone. I wrote the check and I smiled and I danced at the reception, and when I saw my son laughing with his new wife, I told myself this was what love looked like. What I didn't know then was that Cassandra had already started keeping score. I don't mean that in a dramatic way. It wasn't obvious. It came out slowly, over years, in small ways that each seemed forgivable on their own. She'd give me a polite but distant hug at Christmas. She'd answer my questions about their life with short sentences that didn't invite more questions. She'd make plans that coincidentally always seemed to fall on the days Daniel and I had lunch scheduled. And Daniel would call to reschedule. And I'd say, of course, no problem, and hang up the phone and sit with a feeling I couldn't quite name. When they bought their house in Charlotte in 2020, they were short on the down payment. Daniel called me, a little awkward, and explained the situation. I had savings, Richard's life insurance, money I'd set aside over the years, a modest retirement fund I'd been careful with. I gave them $40,000. Not a loan, a gift, because they were my family, because that's what I thought family meant. After that, the calls got a little warmer for a while. Cassandra started texting me recipe ideas. She sent me a photo of their new kitchen once it was painted. Daniel came to visit by himself that Thanksgiving, and we watched football and ate too much. And it felt, briefly, like things might be okay. Then they had Connor. Connor was born in March of 2022, and he was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen since Daniel himself. I drove down to Charlotte the week after he came home from the hospital with a car full of things I'd bought and things I'd made, quilts I'd been working on for months, little outfits, a rocking chair that had been in my family for 3 generations. Cassandra was polite. Tired, understandably. But there was something in the way she watched me hold Connor, something careful and tight, that I filed away and tried to forget. I asked, early on, about being involved. Not in an overwhelming way. I said I'd love to come down once a month, if that worked for them. Stay in a hotel. Not at the house. I'd learned that lesson with a friend's grandchild situation. And I wasn't going to make that mistake. Just come visit, take them to dinner, spend time with my grandson. Cassandra said they'd let me know what worked. The let me know never really came. I'd suggest a weekend, and there'd be a conflict. I'd try again, and Connor had a cold. I'd try again, and they had plans. By the time Connor was a year old, I had seen him 4 times. I kept asking Daniel about it. Gently. I'd say, "I'd love to see you all. Is there a good time coming up?" And he'd say, "Yeah, Mom. I'll check with Cassandra." That phrase, "I'll check with Cassandra," started to echo in a way I didn't want to examine too closely. I'm not naive. I've been alive long enough to know that daughters-in-law sometimes have legitimate reasons to keep their distance from a mother-in-law. I did a lot of honest self-examination during those years. Had I been too present? Too opinionated? Too much? I asked myself that seriously. I went back over every visit, every conversation, looking for the thing I'd done wrong. I couldn't find it. But I also knew my perspective was limited. So I kept quiet. I kept adjusting. I kept sending birthday cards and Christmas presents and little packages when I saw something I knew Connor would love, and I kept waiting for the distance to close on its own. In the spring of last year, Daniel called me about a business opportunity. He and a colleague were thinking about opening a second location of the fitness studio he managed. He'd been crunching numbers. They needed investors or co-signers on a loan. He was wondering if I might be willing to help. I asked him to send me the business plan. He did. I looked at it carefully. I spent 3 evenings going through it. And I had questions. The projected revenue felt optimistic. The location they'd chosen had high foot traffic but also high overhead. I wasn't saying no. I was saying I wanted to understand what I was putting my money into. He said he'd get back to me with answers. He didn't, not quickly. A few weeks went by. I followed up. He said they were still working out some details. 2 months later came Connor's second birthday party. I had been invited. Daniel had called me himself, said it was a Saturday afternoon party. Backyard. Casual. Just family and a few of their friends. I was so happy when he called. I'd already bought Connor's gift weeks in advance, a wooden train set with hand-painted cars, the kind I'd seen at a craft fair in town and immediately known was right for him. I wrapped it carefully. I made my grandmother's lemon cake, Connor's favorite from the one visit where I'd gotten to feed him a slice. I drove down to Charlotte on a Friday night, stayed at a hotel nearby, and Saturday afternoon I drove to their house with my cake in a carrier and the wrapped train set in the back seat. The front door was open. I could hear voices and music and children laughing in the backyard. I knocked and stepped into the entryway. Cassandra came in from the kitchen before I'd taken 3 steps. She stopped when she saw me, and something crossed her face. Not surprise exactly, but a kind of hardening, the way a door looks right before it closes. "What are you doing here?" she said. I held up the cake, a little confused. "It's Connor's birthday party. Daniel invited me." She crossed her arms. Her voice was very level, very controlled, the way voices get when someone has been deciding what to say for a long time. "I don't know why Daniel told you that, but this is our home. And right now I'm telling you that you're not welcome here." I stood there in their entryway holding my grandson's birthday cake, and I cannot describe to you what that sentence felt like. It felt like a door I hadn't known was being closed, finally latching shut. It felt like a sound you can't unhear. I said, "Can I at least give Connor his gift?" She shook her head once. "No," I said. "Is Daniel here?" She said yes. I said, "Can I speak with him?" She went to get him, and when Daniel came in from the backyard, when he saw me standing there, saw the cake, saw my face, his expression did something complicated. He looked caught. That was the word for it. He looked like a man caught between 2 things, and I watched him choose. "Mom," he said, "maybe it's not the best time." He didn't say she was wrong. He didn't say she was out of line. He stood there, and used the language of compromise, maybe not the best time, as though I were a scheduling conflict rather than his mother. I set the cake down on the little table by the door. I put the wrapped train set next to it. I looked at my son for a long moment, and I said, very quietly, "Okay, Daniel," and he left. I sat in my car in their driveway for a few minutes, not crying, which surprised me. Just sitting. There was a clarity in that moment that I don't know how to explain, except to say that some things, once seen, cannot be unseen. I had spent years adjusting, accommodating, softening myself so I would take up less space in my own son's life, and in the end, the space I took up was still too much. I drove back to the hotel. I ordered room service. I watched a nature documentary about Yellowstone that I couldn't tell you a single thing about. And somewhere around 10 o'clock that night, I picked up my phone and called my attorney. I didn't call her to be dramatic. I called her because I am a practical woman, and because there was one thing I could do that would say, clearly and permanently, what I could not seem to say any other way. Her name is Patricia, and I've known her for 15 years. I told her what had happened. She listened without interrupting. Then she said, "Do you know what you want to do?" I said I did. My will, at that point, left the bulk of my estate to Daniel. Some charitable gifts, a few items to old friends, but Daniel was the primary beneficiary. I had never questioned that. He was my son. That was simply how things were. I asked Patricia to change it. We met that Monday. I sat in her office, and we went through everything carefully and thoughtfully, because I didn't want to act out of anger. I wanted to act out of clarity. There is a difference, and I knew it. I wasn't trying to punish Daniel. I was trying to be honest about what my assets were for. They were for people and causes that had shown up for me, that aligned with what I believed mattered. And when I looked at my life honestly, I could see that the places I was needed were not in my son's Charlotte house. I restructured everything. A significant portion now goes to a literacy foundation fitting for a former teacher. Another portion to a hospice organization that helped me when Richard was ill, before we knew how fast things would move. And for Connor, my grandson, I set up an independent educational trust, administered by Patricia's firm, not by Daniel and Cassandra, so that when Connor is 18, there will be money for him for school, and it will be waiting for him regardless of what happens between me and his parents. I made sure of that. I wanted Connor to know someday that I had never stopped thinking about him. I also, gently but clearly, declined to co-sign any loan. I told Patricia not to send any notification to Daniel. Not yet. I wanted him to find out the way it would eventually surface on its own. I didn't want a scene. I didn't want a confrontation. I just wanted to have finally, for the first time in years, made a decision entirely on my own terms. 3 weeks later, Daniel called me. He was not yelling, but he was tight in the way men get when they're trying to control something. He said he'd heard I'd been making changes to my estate planning. I didn't ask how he'd heard. He asked if that was true. I said it was. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Mom, I want to understand what's happening with you." I thought about how to answer that. I thought about all the Sundays I'd spent hoping he'd call first. I thought about the 4 times in 2 years I'd held my grandson. I thought about him standing in his own entryway watching me be turned away and choosing the words, "Maybe not the best time." I said, "I think you do understand, Daniel. I think if you're honest with yourself, you know exactly what's happening." He said he thought things had been fine between us. I said, "I know you thought that. That's part of what I've had to accept." He asked about the business loan, and I told him I'd decided my money needed to go other places. He asked about Connor, and I told him about the trust that Connor would be taken care of for his education, fully, through an arrangement that didn't require Daniel's involvement to function. I heard him go very quiet when I said that. At some point he said, "I'm sorry, Mom. About the party." I said, "I believe you," he said. "She's not Cassandra. She's not easy, but I love her. I said, I know you do. And I want you to have a good marriage, Daniel. I really mean that. He said he didn't want to lose me. I said, you haven't lost me. But things have changed. I've changed. I needed to change, and I should have done it sooner. We haven't spoken more than a handful of times since then. The conversations are short, careful, like two people navigating a room that's been rearranged. He knows where I stand now, in a way he didn't before. I don't know what he'll do with that. That's no longer mine to manage. What is mine, what I've come back to? Like someone returning to a house they were born in is my own life, the one I'd been slowly handing over, piece by piece, trying to earn a place at a table I'd helped build. I joined a watercolor class at the Art Center downtown. I'd always wanted to paint, and always had a reason not to. There's a group of us 5 women, ranging from 55 to 81, and we meet every Tuesday and Thursday, and we are, collectively, not very talented, and it is absolutely wonderful. I've made 2 friends there. Real friends. The kind who call just to talk. I booked a trip to Ireland for October. My mother's family was from County Clare, and I've always said someday. Someday. And someday has arrived. I sleep better than I have in years. I want to be careful here, because I know some of you watching this might be in the early stages of what I went through. That slow erosion where you keep thinking it'll get better, keep telling yourself the distance is temporary, keep recalibrating yourself so you'll be easier to be around. And I want to say something to you that I wish someone had said to me a long time ago. The love you have for your children is real. The fact that they are not currently honoring it does not make it less real. But love cannot be the reason you make yourself smaller and smaller until there's nothing left of you to give. At some point, the most loving thing you can do for yourself, for them, honestly, is to stop pretending that everything is fine when it isn't. I didn't stop loving Daniel. I will never stop loving Daniel. But I stopped organizing my entire interior life around his approval, and I stopped treating his comfort as more important than my dignity. And the moment I did that, something shifted, something I can only describe as my own self, coming back to me after a long, unexplained absence. My neighbor Patricia, not my attorney, a different Patricia, the one who lives 2 houses down and has a dog named Biscuit who digs under my fence, she asked me the other day how I was doing, and I said, honestly, without thinking about it, I'm doing really well. And she laughed and said, you look it. I don't know what the future holds with Daniel. I hope he grows. I believe people can grow even when the evidence is slow to show. I hope that someday Connor will know his grandmother and we'll have time together. I'm leaving that door open, quietly, from a distance, but I am not waiting by it anymore. I am out on my porch with my coffee, and the birds are at the feeder. And the mountains are doing what mountains do, standing there, steady and unbothered, as if they've known all along that the storms pass, and the view is still there on the other side. If you're somewhere in the middle of this kind of hurt, I see you, and I want you to know it is not too late, not for the life you deserve, not for the peace that is still yours to choose. It took me too long to choose it, but I chose it, and I would choose it again,